Among Squaresoft's critically acclaimed and widely celebrated PS1 library, one of its most overlooked and unique entries is the unequivocally brilliant Vagrant story. With the nearly incomprehensible success garnered by the Final Fantasy series near the end of the 1990s, Square found the security to allow some of its up-and-coming talent to take the reins on new IPs, giving them the freedom to explore ideas that had never been tried before. Vagrant's story is the result of the genius of Yasumi Matsuno, perhaps the best director and storyteller in the company's history, during a time when Squaresoft was clearly at its most inventive. Development began in January of 1998, and from the start, Matsuno was dead set on making an RPG wholly unlike that which had become the mainstream in the industry. With this game, he was determined to divert from the concepts that had become tied with the identity of Final Fantasy, desiring instead to make something that couldn't be defined with comparisons to other popular games. This game was created by sticking with the design sense and ideas of all the members of our staff. The drama of the story itself is different from the Final Fantasy series. If Final Fantasy is the game industry version of a major Hollywood movie, then Vagrant's story is an independent movie to be watched quietly in a small movie theater. The scale is different, but the burning enthusiasm and the dreams behind the scenes are the same as in the majors. Having become well known for his work on Ogre Battle, Tactics Ogre, and Final Fantasy Tactics, Matsuno had made a name for himself with his prowess in the tactical RPG realm. However, with Vagrant's story, he wanted to step away from the familiar and experiment with new ideas, giving himself an opportunity to try something outside of the strategy role-playing game. With this vision concretely set, Matsuno led a team of 20 developers, which grew in size to 50 at its peak, in the pursuit of an experience that defied the expectations of Square's fans while still being satisfying to play. That being said, Matsuno wanted to make it clear that the game was not necessarily made for everyone. Unlike the Final Fantasy series and Metal Gear Solid, Vagrant is geared toward hardcore gamers. It shouldn't be bought with the expectation of a Final Fantasy or Metal Gear Solid. I'm stating this because the playing method and satisfaction vector is different from other games. Seafood versus meat dishes, French cuisine versus Japanese cuisine, soccer versus baseball, rock versus jazz, Titanic versus the Blair Witch Project. The vectors are different, like the examples given above. In addition to this, another reason the game feels so unique is because it can be difficult to nail down the specific genre it fits under. When asked about whether it should be considered an action, role-playing, strategy, or adventure game, Matsuno responded by saying it encompasses all of these genres, and at the same time, it doesn't fit into any of them. It's a new breed of game that doesn't take any form of pre-existing style. For convenience sake, we can say that our genre is that of adventure, but we're not interested in forcing our work into a specific genre. I suppose it goes without saying that such ambitions were lofty and proposed high levels of risk on Square's part. Beyond this, however, was the fact that while other game studios have been diving headfirst into fully 3D games for some time, Square hadn't been doing so regularly with their games. Final Fantasy had used polygonal models for the characters, but pre-rendered backgrounds to traverse upon. Xenogears was the opposite, creating fully 3D environments to move through, but with 2D character sprites. This had a lot to do with the fact that Squaresoft was making very large and expansive RPGs that were constantly running into memory limitations on the PlayStation. And as Hironobu Sakaguchi confirmed in a recent interview, they were also regularly fighting with these limitations in hopes of reducing load times. With Vagrant Story, Matsuno decided the team was going to design the game in full 3D, and that decision caused numerous problems that resulted in huge cuts from the story to fit budget and time constraints, as well as to poly count in order to keep the game running at a steady frame rate. We were always lacking main memory. Making slight adjustments, improving interface, increasing the quality of the game balance, adding textures. Basically, when doing anything in the realm of game development, memory is crucial. Having to share between each section, or at times aggressively taking back memory and making that choice, was what was the most difficult aspect. Due to capacity and development time, over half the scenario had to be cut. With this, it was also necessary to cut out gaming elements as well. There were AI-controlled NPCs that supported Ashley in the middle of the story, but they had to be cut as well due to memory restrictions. Character modeler Eiichiro Nakatsu described this balancing act by saying that the character modeling for Vagrant was a constant fight against high specs. The maximum number of polygons allowed to keep a 30 frames per second frame rate is approximately 3,000, and all the maps and characters were polygons. When several characters appear on a map, the number of polygons required for each model was about 300. When the polygon count is low, some discrepancy can arise between the designed image and the finished model. In order to avoid such problems, we face the difficult task of selecting an aspect of the character on which to focus our attention. We tried to strike just the right balance between all parts of the characters: shape of the faces, the length of the arms, the thickness of the fingers, the waist, and the hair. In addition to the design, we also had to create models that were easy for the motion designers to manipulate. Despite this difficult work to get the game running smoothly, the results are undeniably gorgeous. I would go as far as to say that Vagrant Story is the best looking game on the PS1, both from a stylistic standpoint as well as a technical one. Even playing it in the modern age left me feeling legitimately impressed. The incredible attention to detail in the environments, the silky smooth animations on both the bodies and faces of the characters, and the dark comic book feel evoked by the art style, all come together to build a super cohesive look and feel that is both hard to believe was possible on the PlayStation and also served as a prelude to the upcoming graphical leaps of the PlayStation 2. The architectural design is one of the game's standout features as well. Inspired by the ancient real-life town of Saint-Emilion, Vagrant Story's Le Monde radiates a similar sentiment of culture and sanctity. Inspired by the photos he had seen, Matsuno took his team to France to study and adopt what they saw into the game, and the results are absolutely amazing. I've been on record saying that Akihiko Yoshida is my favorite character designer at Square, and the evolution of his style from Ogre Battle, Tactics Ogre, and Final Fantasy Tactics to Vagrant Story leaves it instantly recognizable while also fitting with the much grittier tone that this game required, likewise giving a glimpse into the direction his look would take for future games like Final Fantasy XII and XIV. I really dig how light and shadow were used to create such a stunning sense of atmosphere, where the creative use of texture maps generates the illusion of speculars and rim light to establish high contrast that beautifully separates the characters from the backgrounds. That, along with the text boxes and font choice, really cement that comic book look. It's honestly just brilliant work considering the limitations they were facing, knowing they wouldn't be able to use real-time lighting to achieve the look they were going for. What impresses me the most, though, is Matsuno's mastery of the art of storytelling. His direction is so astute, his pacing so perfect, and his choices so sharp that every cutscene in the game feels like a cinematic masterpiece. The cinematography in particular is on an entirely different level from just about any other game on the platform, and is so striking in that regard that you could take like 95% of these scenes, recreate them shot for shot, and have a visually stunning live-action film. Perhaps the only game even remotely comparable to it from its era is Metal Gear Solid, and it's no surprise that Matsuno, like Hideo Kojima, is a student of film who took tons of inspiration from the movies he's watched throughout his life. The writing is also some of the most clever, subtle, and skillful that I've ever seen in gaming anywhere. When it comes to dialogue, three of the greatest indicators of great writing are the clip and measure at which the exposition is given, the level of subtext that is woven in to avoid on-the-nose or excessively explicit characterization, and the avoidance of fatiguing repetition that pads scenes with long and unnecessary filler text. Vagrant Story emphatically checks all three of these boxes, being paced in such a way where scenes never overstay their welcome, build intrigue and mystery that entices the player to keep moving forward, and gives more of an implicit view of the characters and events that requires thought and introspection on the player's part. This is true across every game Matsuno has directed, and builds a strong case for him being the best storyteller Square has ever had. While the story itself might not be as complex or filled with monumental concepts as Takahashi's Xenogears, nor as grandiose or epic as a Final Fantasy game, when it comes to actually executing on theme and building an atmosphere and pace that keeps the player intrigued and anxious for more, I don't think there's anyone at Square who has come close to topping Matsuno. He's on a different level from all the others in that regard. It's also important to mention that the English version of the game excels to even greater heights in regards to the writing, which is largely due to Alexander O. Smith's excellent localization. The original Japanese script differs largely in terms of the style of language that's used, being composed of fairly standard modern text, while the English version is rich with heightened Shakespearean-style vocabulary that fits the setting much better. While Smith makes it clear that he feels there's no issue whatsoever with Matsuno's dialogue or storytelling, which is innately superb, he did feel that adding a bit of a spin on it would really put a seal on that pseudo-medieval European setting, and had been given the direction to make it biblical anyway. To give an example of this, in this scene we have two soldiers giving some expository dialogue regarding the city they're in and its magical properties. A more direct translation of what they say would read something like, "Is this magic stuff really that easy to use? If you believe the studies of ancient legend, there are these grimoires that let anyone use it." However, the official English script reads quite differently.
"Swine'll take wing for the likes of us use magic, my friend. Aye, but with a grimoire, your fattest sow can outfly my swiftest falcon, if you believe the chroniclers."
While both more or less say the same thing, I love the character that the second example gives to the world we're in, and how it roots us in a kingdom that feels sufficiently archaic. It's also just far more poetic and interesting language that I feel flows beautifully. I personally can't get enough of it, and in all of the games that Alexander O. Smith has translated for Square, I've appreciated the liberties he's taken to provide this kind of rich character to these amazing worlds. It's completely evident that he's not only a good translator, but an excellent writer himself, and he's easily my favorite of all the translators to have worked for the company. The story itself, while adopting a much smaller scale than what most Square fans are likely used to with their RPGs, is nonetheless a fascinating and careening tale filled with bombastic action, dark, ancient mysteries, and political intrigue that provides plenty of complex subject matter to chew on. It takes place in the Kingdom of Valendia and follows main character Ashley Riot, an elite agent of the VKP, or Valendia Knights of Peace, as he's sent on a mission to investigate Duke Bardorba, a senior member of the Valendian Parliament, and his ties to a religious cult called Molenkamp. In addition to this, Ashley is assigned to uncover Cardinal Batistam's interest in Molenkamp's leader, Sidney Lasterat. Upon arriving at the Duke's manor, Ashley finds that it's ablaze, and a conflict has already erupted between Molenkamp and the Order of the Crimson Blades, a militia representing the priesthood of Iocus and deployed by the Cardinal. Amidst the chaos, Ashley witnesses Sidney's daunting powers firsthand as he and his accomplice Hardin kidnap the Duke's son Joshua and flee to Leomond, a derelict 2,000-year-old city which is steeped in dark magic. Ashley is then tasked to enter Leomond and discover what Sidney is plotting, all the while continuing his investigation into the Cardinal's true intentions. At this point, a three-way struggle begins between the VKP, Molenkamp, and the Priest of Iocus, represented by Romeo Guildenstern and the Crimson Blades, for mastery of Leomond's power. This leads to the unveiling of many secrets, not only those regarding the danger that Leomond poses to the world, but also to those of Ashley's own sinister past, leading him on a path of difficult self-examination and acceptance. Overall, it's a captivating story that is realized to its full potential by absolutely remarkable execution. And the fact that half the scenario was cut, while still feeling like a complete story, is nothing short of miraculous, attesting to Matsuno's brilliance. The story's ending definitely leaves things open for more to follow, which we unfortunately never received. But there's nothing about the story as it stands that makes it feel like it's missing something important or is incomplete in any way. The storytelling is easily the best feature of the game, and there isn't a single aspect of it that I find necessary to criticize. The gameplay, on the other hand, is a lot more difficult for me to give universal praise to. While I love most of the ideas it presents, I think my biggest problem is that it's bogged down by a user interface and design structure that completely forgoes that brisk and exciting sense of pace found so prevalently in the storytelling. This is of course largely due to the limitations of the PlayStation with agonizing load times, but is compounded by unintuitive menu design, unduly long battle animations, and basic design decisions that simply grind any sense of momentum to a halt as you spend more of your time analyzing enemies and changing your equipment than actually fighting. For those who prioritize strategy and experimentation in their RPGs, this of course won't be a problem for you, and will provide ample room to think things through and discover the intricacies of the game's systems. For those who look for exciting combat though, this will likely be too slow-paced and monotonous for you. I want to speak first about the game's difficulty, which is widely considered to be among the hardest games Square's ever produced, but I think to call it a hard game is a bit misleading. I wouldn't describe it as being difficult so much as confounding. Success in Vagrant's story doesn't require the development of any kind of special skill, so much as a sound understanding of how the game works, making sure you check a long list of important factors before you try to deal damage. In other words, most people struggle with this game because they're unaware of the tools at their disposal and how they should be used, not because they just need to get good. This certainly could have been mitigated with better tutorials, but as Matsuno mentioned in the interview I referenced earlier, I think the game was deliberately designed to let players figure things out on their own. Let's demonstrate with a basic example. When you approach an enemy and tap the attack button, the action pauses as a spherical grid appears around Ashley. This shows the range at which he can attack with his currently equipped weapon. In other words, if the enemy falls within this grid, they can be engaged. Most enemies have multiple body parts that can be targeted: the head, body, arms, legs, wings, tail, and so forth. Here's where things get interesting. Depending on the enemy and the body part you're targeting, both your chance of success and damage dealt changes, and this has everything to do with the equipment that both you and your enemy are currently wielding. While there are many different types of weapons, one-handed swords, two-handed swords, axes, maces, bowguns, daggers, polearms, and so on, what you really need to understand is that there are only 3 blade types: edged, blunt, and piercing. These 3 blade types are what you need to pay attention to if you come across an enemy and it appears as if you can only deal a small amount of damage. Very early in the game, you'll gain access to the Analyze ability, which will allow you to check your enemy's strengths and weaknesses in the status menu. Enemies will usually have a vulnerability to one of these 3 blade types, so if you check the status and see that your opponent is weak to blunt damage, you'll need to change to a blunt weapon as a first step. It gets a bit more complex down the line though, where an enemy will have different weaknesses on different body parts. So while it may be weak to edged on its arms or tail, it could be strong to edged on its torso or head, for example. So you'll need to make sure that you have the right weapon equipped and that you're attacking the right body part. This goes for elemental weaknesses as well. If an enemy is weak to fire, it's a good idea to apply gems to your weapon to boost its fire damage. There are some late-game enemies, however, who have different elemental affinities on different body parts, so you'll have to watch out for that. In addition to this, buffing and debuffing are extremely important for boosting both your hit percentage and damage. Throughout the game, you'll acquire items called Grimoires, which can be used to cast a variety of spells. Once the Grimoire has been used, Ashley learns that spell permanently and can access it via the battle menu so long as he has enough MP to cast it. I didn't bother much with the offensive magic, but the buffs and debuffs are extremely important and should not be ignored. Once you've gone through all of these steps, analyzing the enemy, equipping the right blade type, applying the appropriate gems, as well as buffing and debuffing, there shouldn't be any reason you can't deal decent damage. All it really takes is time, patience, and a little experimentation. As a common practice, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you have the right equipment before moving into a new area, which means that carrying a variety of weapons and gems with you is a smart thing to do. I would advise having at least a decent sword, axe, mace, dagger, and spear, all of which you can craft and customize in blacksmith workshops, so that you'll be ready for whatever situation might come your way. Generally, one-handed weapons are better because they allow you to carry a shield, but the most important thing is that you have access to edged, blunt, and piercing damage at all times. There's a great deal more to the combat than this, and I'll cover some of it now, but if you at least go in with an understanding of what I just described, you shouldn't find the game all that difficult. It's just a matter of checking to make sure you're using all of your tools in the right way. First, I want to touch on enemy class types: human, beast, undead, phantom, dragon, and evil. To put it simply, when you use a weapon on an enemy, there's a possibility for that weapon to gain a bonus to the class type of the enemy you're attacking, in essence making it stronger against that enemy class and element moving forward. However, it could also lose effectiveness against the following 2 classes. So, if you're fighting a beast-type enemy, you might gain proficiency against beasts, but also lose potency against undead and phantom types. Most older guides will recommend that you designate a weapon right off the bat that's made to fight human and phantom class enemies, one for beasts and dragons, and one for undead and evil. While this certainly isn't a bad idea, I found in my 3 playthroughs that class has only a small effect on final damage output when compared to blade type and element. So sure, if you want to play optimally, keep this in mind, but don't worry about it too much as long as you have the right blade and elemental affinity. Risk is another large factor to take into consideration during combat. The basic idea is that the more attacks you successfully land, the higher your risk becomes, which lowers both your defense and your chance of success, leaving Ashley vulnerable to attack and making enemies more difficult to hit. You can use items during combat to reduce your risk, of course, but these items, while not necessarily rare, aren't exactly abundant either, so you'll have to be careful with them if you want to keep some for security during a boss fight. There are also chain abilities that can be unlocked throughout the game, which essentially give you added bonuses to your attacks so long as you execute them with proper timing. This means that just before you land an attack, an exclamation mark will appear above Ashley's head, and you'll be afforded a small window of opportunity to press either circle, square, or triangle to start a combo. As long as you keep hitting your buttons with the right timing, you could keep this going until the enemy is dead, but keep in mind that doing so increases your risk pretty quickly. For the majority of the game, I selected Heavy Shot, Gain Magic, and Temper as my chain abilities, allowing me to deal extra damage and regain much needed MP. But you could also set up chain abilities that recover your HP, reduce enemies' MP, or even inflict status ailments like Silence or Paralyze. Chains don't apply to attacking alone though, as you can also set up defensive chains to reduce enemy damage or reflect their attacks back at them with the right timing. Break arts are another option available to you, and in all honesty are my favorite way of dealing damage. You unlock break arts by accumulating a certain number of kills with a particular weapon type, and once they're unlocked, can be accessed with the D-pad in the battle menu. These are powerful attacks that will require you to sacrifice your own HP, but they don't increase risk at all, making them absolutely worth using as often as you'd like. They also have a huge attack range, which is super nice as well. You'll have to pay careful attention though, because even though you might be using an edged weapon, the break art might actually deal piercing or blunt damage. Weapon crafting is robust, and in all honesty, my suggestion is that you use a chart to guide you, but understanding the basics should be enough to allow decent room for experimentation. Basically, it involves combining a blade with a grip, and you can find these in chests throughout the world, as drops from enemies, or by breaking down assembled weapons into their base blade and grip. The best advice I can give here is to pay attention to the blade type, edged, blunt, and piercing, and make sure you get the best boost possible to that type of damage with your grip selection. You'll also want to pay attention to the material the blade is made from, whether bronze, iron, Hagane, silver, or Damascus, because higher grade metals will obviously affect the weapon's quality and damage. This goes for crafting armor and shields as well, which add leather and wood respectively as base materials. Certain workshops only allow you to combine lower quality materials, so you'll have to pay attention to that upon entering or by reading the charts posted on the walls. Another important factor for grips is that they carry gem slots, and you'll want as many of those as possible generally speaking, because they allow you to increase a weapon's damage with elemental affinities or improve its accuracy and so forth. You can also combine weapons together to discover new ones, and this is where looking at a chart is recommended unless you want to spend hours and hours experimenting on your own. As a quick tip, only combine weapons of the same type. Axes with axes, swords with swords, maces with maces, etc., because otherwise you'll always make something worse. Weapon crafting is an integral part to preparing yourself, so making sure you're familiar with the basic concepts will help avoid screwing yourself over by making the wrong combination and creating a lower quality weapon. You'll also find storage chests in workshops, where you can dump the equipment you aren't using to free up your limited inventory. This is perhaps the best example in the game of hardware limitations bogging down the experience. First of all, the load times to even open one of these chests is ridiculous, but once you're finally in there, you can choose whether you want to store items or remove them. Menu design and user interface are not optimal here, requiring you to navigate to the item you want to store, click on it once if you simply want to change its order in the list, but twice if you want to place the item in the chest. At this point, you'll have to confirm your decision, and then, strangely enough, you have to save your game in order to actually complete the action. If you don't save the game, you cannot store or remove anything from the chest, and saving the game takes a fair amount of time. This is only one example of a larger problem I have with the Vagrant story, which is the stop-and-go nature of everything. You're constantly stopping the action to navigate through layers and layers of menus so that you can analyze your enemy, equip yourself the right way, store or remove items, or watch one of the many extremely long battle animations. Sometimes you don't have any need to engage the enemies in a room and might just want to run past them, but good luck, because they'll all be casting buffs, debuffs, and magic spells that take forever. All of this makes the gameplay really plod forward at a heavy, sluggish pace, to the point where I was sometimes frustrated with it. When all is said and done though, I understand that the hardware was the biggest issue here. The game was probably just a little too ambitious for the PS1, but while I felt annoyed from time to time by this on-again, off-again nature of the game, the depth of its systems and customization are certainly worth a little frustration here and there. The exploration is superb though, with lots of treasure and secrets that can only be unlocked with the right key or sigil. It will require some backtracking, which might be annoying to some, but the game's teleport system makes that easier down the line. There are some doors which you'll only be able to unlock on New Game Plus as well, meaning you can't explore 100% of the areas on a single playthrough. The map itself is really, really helpful, accounting for which keys and sigils are needed in certain rooms. It's seriously one of the best maps I've ever seen in an RPG and makes navigation so much more convenient. There's also lots of platforming and puzzle solving, the former of which is suspect at best, and the latter of which is really fun. The puzzles mostly involve pushing blocks around that enable you to reach platforms that are too high for Ashley to get up to on his own, but they get pretty complex in the late game and are fun to think through and figure out. One thing you'll probably want to make sure you do though is switch a certain option in the system menu that keeps puzzles solved after you've figured it out for the first time. Otherwise, if you leave a room and come back, you'll have to solve the puzzle all over again. Since Matsuno's time at Quest developing Ogre Battle, Hitoshi Sakimoto has been his go-to composer, and it was no different here. After his excellent work on the Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack, Sakimoto started writing in a similar vein for Vagrant Story, but Matsuno was quick to change his mindset. Early in the project, I prepared some bright and cheerful tunes like Final Fantasy Tactics, but Yasumi Matsuno told me forget about Final Fantasy Tactics. I want it more deep and heavy. Now you're composing Indiana Jones, but you know, what I need for Vagrant Story is the X-Files. That made me realize my big mistake. The music was actually just great, but was totally out of sync with the game's concept. I ran out and got soundtracks including the X-Files and learned from these environmental scores. I find it interesting that Matsuno referenced Indiana Jones when speaking about the style Sakimoto was writing in originally, because I've always heard classic Hollywood in Sakimoto's music. I think the influence of John Williams, James Horner, and Danny Elfman is clear in much of his work, but that's not so much the case here, where the music really takes a dark and experimental turn. Like the rest of the game, the soundtrack is entirely unique, difficult to compare to anything else I've heard, especially for a JRPG. It's got this chaotic nature to it, a sort of mysterious and sinister vibe that feels as if it's about to burst into mayhem at any moment, which just fits the tone of the game so perfectly. It still has its soft, heartfelt moments though, as well as its hopeful pieces too, and those shine all the brighter amidst all the discord surrounding it. Overall, Vagrant Story is a hidden gem on the PlayStation that is without question among the most unique and original titles Square has ever produced. While it doesn't carry some of the hallmarks of other popular JRPGs of the time, things like world map exploration, towns and shops, or NPCs who give side quests, what it does offer is an extremely focused experience that coincides with some of the best storytelling I've ever seen in a video game. The presentation is off the charts, with the most detailed graphics on the platform, striking art design, clever writing, and rousing music and sound. The direction is incredible and the story captivating, keeping me constantly motivated to delve deeper and unravel its mysteries. The exploration and navigation are fantastic thanks to convenient fast travel and an excellent map. The puzzles are challenging and fun, and the combat and equipment systems are incredibly deep and satisfying to master once you understand how they work. The pace of battles is a bit too slow for me, with a constant stop-and-go feel that became frustrating at times. But when weighed against what you get in return, it's hard not to recommend the game to anyone who likes a good, dungeon-crawling type of challenge alongside one of the best stories ever told in the medium. If any of that sounds like it's up your alley, this is a game you definitely need to play. I'd like to thank our patrons who make it possible for me to put this kind of time and effort into these videos. If you appreciate the work that we're doing on the channel, consider heading to our Patreon page by clicking on the icon here on the screen. It's because of the support of the audience that we're able to continue creating these high-quality videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again real soon.